Professor Artemov, would you please do the honors? No, you have to unmute yourself. Okay.
Oops, do I?
Okay, you're unmuted,
No, thank you. Yeah, so the honor is on mine, of course. And it's a big pleasure to introduce Andrei Rodin, whom I first met in Paris quite a while ago, actually. And he's arguably the most prominent expert in foundational mathematics among philosophers as this philosophical subject in the current Russia. And the author, he has international experience, includes years working in France, basically in Paris, with Mike Detlefsen, and extended visits to Princeton, working with Voevodsky on the project which will be the subject of today's talk. And he's also an author of a very interesting book by Springer. You can check it out on Amazon. It has just good press and a very impressive book. So I'm just welcoming Andrei Rodin at our seminar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Good evening, everybody. So I'll talk tonight about Voevodsky Unachieved project. So what is Unachieved project?
One second, Andrei, yeah. your video is off.
Yeah, I know. Maybe I just turn it off just to make it, because otherwise my connection may be in risk. You see?
Okay, good, fine.
If it's okay. So Voevodsky is of course known for two major contributions in different branches of mathematics, algebraic geometry, and foundations of mathematics. But actually, he spent quite a lot of time and effort working in applied mathematics. So it would be his would-be third contribution, more specifically in mathematical biology. And that project remained unachieved. So I'll talk just a bit about that project without actually going to details. But rather, I'll try to present Vladimir's general understanding of role of mathematics, these generalities, but also some, I think, very interesting strategies that he used for achieving his goal, even if the project, after all, was not quite successful. So that's a fragment of interview that Vladimir gave to his personal friend Roman Mikhailov in 2012. It's actually very personal and contains many details. I think it's only available in Russian so far, although I've seen in John Baez's blog some translation into English made, I think, automatically, and some comments. But it's just for biographical details, basically. I use it here. So he describes his career and says to Roman that since fall 97, I, Vladimir, realized that my main contribution to motif theory, motif cohomology was already accomplished. That's, by the way, quite before he got his Fields Medal in 2002, 5 years earlier. Since then, I was very consciously and actively looking for a theme to work on. Considering tendencies of development of mathematics as a science, I realized that mathematics is at age of crisis, or more precisely, two crises. The first crisis concerns the gap between pure and applied mathematics. It is clear that sooner or later there will arise the question of why society should pay money to people who occupy themselves with things having no practical application. And the second crisis, which is less evident, concerns the fact that mathematics becomes very complex, and as a consequence, once again, sooner or later, mathematical paper will become too difficult for a detailed checking. And so so I decided to do something in order to prevent this crisis. In the first case, that meant to find an applied task which would require for its solution methods of pure mathematics developed during the last years, or at least during the last decades. I was looking for open problems which would be interesting for me, which I could apply to today's mathematics. Finally, I chose, as I now understand wrongly, he says in 2012, the problem of reconstruction of history of population, meaning human population or other living organism, on the basis of their present genetic constitution. I worked on this problem about 2 years and finally realized in 2009 that everything that I invented was useless. That here, I'm sorry for kind of messy drawing, but I tried to make a timeline of Vladimir's research. So it begins sometimes in the 80s when he began to be, actually he was more interested in sciences, and that explains his interest to applied mathematics in physics and chemistry, even more in chemistry. So important date in 1990, where he, by the way, enters Moscow University and also publishes already paper with Mikhail Kapranov, motivated by Grothendieck, Esquisse de Programme. And that's the interesting part of the story. It's not, I will not focus on that story now, but actually sometime later, 1998, Carl Simpson found a mistake. He gave a counterexample to main theorem of that paper. And Vladimir and Mikhail Kapran, they looked and didn't see an error. And so, and actually this so theorem was suspected, but not refuted actually, because people didn't believe into counterexample somehow. So that was just a kind of game of reputations of authority, if you like. And that's actually lasted 23 years until eventually in 2013, Voevodsky, after all, actually using some of these formal methods, which made part of Univalent Foundation, found the error. And the error actually was not fixable. So it was really a non-theorem published as a theorem. So that was important story that motivated in particular his work on Univalent Foundation. And just to make clear, for maybe some people not familiar with it, important part of it and actually major kind of practical foundation, Vladimir, to do that was computer-assisted proof checking. And that sort of foundation supports such proof checking. But that's, again, a parallel story. Otherwise, he continued his work in algebraic geometry until 2010. That's we can trace by his publication and by his unpublished stuff archived. And actually, in interview, he says 2 years, but in the archive, there is a paper already on this population dynamic of 2004. So that project lasted at least 5 years. And you see, it's actually coincided with the initial stage of this Univalent Foundation project. And so I'll try actually argue later that this abrupt abandoning project, this hard judgment that everything was useless, I think was related actually to his new understanding of foundation, of this discovery or invention of Univalent Foundation. It's of course too bad I never asked him about that, even I had a lot of opportunities. So now I should just speculate, but it really looks like that. So I'll try to justify this this claim. Yes. So what I'm going to do now, first of all, I'm going to present actually kind of summary of Voevodsky, actually 3 lectures, very early in his career, in 2003, all of those 3 lectures, just after receiving of his Fields Medal. And 2 of these lectures were given in Wuhan University in China, and 1 more lecture in India. And that's interesting because only in those lectures he pronounced on some general topics that he never did neither in Russia or in America. I don't know, maybe he felt himself more comfortable in that sense in Asia, or it was just coincidence, but it's just a fact, at least the fact of the existing archive. Yeah, so I begin, this actually 2 lectures, but I will not distinguish them in my summary, in Wuhan University. And I understand that that lecture for students, so it's kind of popular lecture, nothing technical. So he says in 2003 that there are 2 most urgent needs in today's mathematics. First, as he put it at that time, build computerized library of mathematical knowledge, or computerized version of Bourbaki. And that's what gave later Univalent Foundation in some form. And second, to bridge pure and apply mathematics is what we've seen already in the interview. So how to do that? No, for the first task, he says we should somehow move from hyperlink mathematical text to mathematical text verifiable with computer. Once again, it's just belongs to this Univalent Foundation part. And okay, here he just put the problem more precisely, that we discovered a lot of interesting new constructions, new mathematical complex, but they're not applied. And actually for Voevodsky, it's really somehow a scandal. So he really somehow by default has this vision that mathematics is just a part of science. So he doesn't believe in pure mathematics as an autonomous science. And we'll see in next lecture, he'll explain it more. But here he gives some kind of sociological, kind of easier explanation why today math is not applied. Well, first he says only few people really understand well modern maths and some fields where it can be applied. And then he says interesting things about scientific policies, I think, because that's focused on application and could be understood as a need to justify every mathematical task with some applied task, but that's actually not what he has in mind. So he says that for successful application, we should do something the opposite. We should abstract mathematical theory from every concrete practical problem and actually work on that abstract part. And that's actually, that's why he opposes what he calls billion-dollar drug policy, right? So, okay, maybe I skip a bit. Finally, he says that mathematics should work as a formal game or puzzle solving. There is nothing wrong in it, and moreover, it's actually a method, but still somehow in the framework of this external applied task. You see, so he justifies this pure mathematics, if you like. He doesn't want that every mathematical theorem or should be driven by application, but still he believes that this application just somehow provides environment or context for all this purely mathematical activity. I just make now very brief comments, and after I finish with this lecture, I give some a bit longer comment, and that will be it. No, first I mentioned already, right? That's very much explained by Vladimir's family background. His father was physicist, the mother chemist, And in school, he was more interested in physics, chemistry, so he was not one of those kids going to special mathematical school. And in a sense, he did not prepare himself for big mathematical career, rather for scientific career more generally. That's something funny, because I actually doubt he ever read anything like Soviet official dialectical materialism, philosophy of mathematics. But if you look into it, it's someone, Rusavin was my older colleague in the institute. It's actually very similar to what Vladimir says and what he thinks about mathematics. And that's, of course, in the university, in Russian mathematical community, there are different people, different views. But I think there is still very strong tradition of kind of combining very theoretical, abstract mathematics with something concrete and applied. And among other prominent figure, Israel Moiseyevich Gelfand was known for that. And he worked in particular mathematical biology. And there is just his saying, he used to say there is only one thing which is more unreasonable than the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics and physics, and this is the unreasonable ineffectiveness of mathematics and biology. So it's somehow Wigner reversed, right? While Wigner is puzzled why mathematics ever works, Israel Moiseyevich is puzzled why it doesn't work in that particular case in biology. So it should work. Anyway, and I think that's also how Vladimir understood by default these things. Yeah, and then he, in the same lecture, or in the next lecture, he actually considered what he calls layers today mathematical. With those layers, actually, historical layers. I think it's a very fair remark that in any particular moment of historical time, actually mathematics is a mixture of mathematics invented and practiced in different times. It's like with the arts and literature, it happens the same. But he sees actually, so he distinguishes what he calls elementary mathematics, some old stuff like elementary geometry. It's of course interesting point, but I will not elaborate that even elementary mathematics in today's textbook is somehow translated into modern terms. But I leave now that topic aside. Then higher mathematics, which is still traditionally so-called, and that's basically integral differential calculus, differential equations, probability theory. That's something developed from 16th to 18th, partly maybe 19th century. So-called modern mathematics, it's say second part of 19th and first part of 20th century, like Galois theory, basic topology, and he interestingly includes logic also here as modern. And finally, he distinguishes what he calls synthetic mathematics, is a later, say, mathematics he was involved himself in. I don't know exactly where he took this word synthetic. I know that Bill Lovier actually used it, and some people use it today after Lovier to refer to, say, some sort of axiomatic and very broad and informal sense construction of theories. No, for example, there is synthetic differential geometry by Andreas Koch, right? It's opposed to analytic in the sense of analytic geometry, right? So I guess that Vladimir uses this word synthetic in a similar way. So he mentions representation theory, algebraic geometry, and homotopy theory, and differential topology. Okay, and why he distinguished that? Because then he observes that this elementary mathematics is very much, as he puts that, integrated into the everyday life with logistics, accountant, calendar, whatever, right? Higher mathematics, calculus, integrated into most sciences. Modern mathematics, like think of group theory, integrated in some sciences. And this synthetic, the latest mathematics, is basically not integrated at all. And that, he thinks, is a really a worry. Yes, and that's now already second lecture, and it partly repeats the same thing. No, I'm sorry, third lecture in Bangalore, sorry, India. So he gives here some interesting details that actually point to his strategy to improve that situation. Well, here repeats basically the same stuff. I already told that. Here he uses a diagram. So here we get by conventional thinking, he understands practice in general sense. And mathematical modeling, it's interacts with this conventional thinking. It's how mathematics is used and applied for, say, practical purposes. He doesn't distinguish sciences, like natural sciences specifically, but I think they somehow on a par with conventional thinking in this camp. And then we have this pure math, which has kind of capacity to, to work autonomously, right? Kind of when those interactions are stopped. But this capacity, according to Vladimir, is very limited. So basically we have kind of big circle from conventional thinking or, say, practice. We have problems in practical sense, say, we should do something, and we use mathematics for that. We kind of model those problems mathematically, and then we solve problems in pure mathematically, in abstraction from all this practical purposes. And then we return this mathematical solution back to mathematical modeling, back to practice. This is a basic scheme. But then he says recently or presently, it actually getting more and more out of balance, as he puts that. And that the reason is that those interactions somehow too weak and slow. They don't work properly. So he says that if we stop this too, will be no money, no funding for mathematics. For some reasons, he was really very much concerned with that. Even he personally was in a good, say, position, particularly after his field medal, of course. And but probably even more importantly, weakening of this arrow one, this downward arrow, actually means no new ideas in mathematics, as he says. So once again, he doesn't believe that mathematics really may work in full isolation from mathematical modeling, from natural sciences, from practice. Yeah, but now he has a proposal how to improve it, and more interesting than just general ideas that we should somehow think about practice. So he thinks that a key factor are computer technologies, and he thinks that it's something new. So that scheme that I just showed, it's say traditional, it's for mathematics, it works for mathematics basically of all times, but now we got computer, and that's actually modified this basic scheme. So we have in between this mathematical modeling and conventional thinking, we have this computer modeling, okay? And that's provides kind of filtering. So if I understand his argument correctly, actually, because of this computer modeling, we have this downward flow is weakened, right? So to mathematical modeling come less things. So we only only those those practical problems find kind of mathematical formulation, mathematical version, which are computable. And that's somehow weakens this, this connection, right? So what should be done? What can be done? So he doesn't propose to somehow to remove computers. No, no, he really believes that they should be there. And it's not his proposal. But his proposal is more, how to say, neat. He observes what he calls double translation problem. So he says, when we have a computational model, right, we find for it what he called analytic model in analytic language. And only then it is translated into foundation, set theoretical language, which he really takes to be the language of modern mathematics at that point in 2003, okay? No, if I understand him correctly, probably it's even, no, at least for me, it better worked into the opposite direction. So what he has here in mind, at least my version, okay? Think about something like climate research, for example, right? So we use analytic models, something like Navier-Stokes equations. So it's a language of what he calls higher mathematics, not yet modern mathematics, right? Differential equations, partial derivation, and so forth. So it's kind of old mathematical language. Then we want to solve them computationally, right? And we want somehow compare our models with data. And so what we do, we, on the basis of this basic theoretical analytic model, we think how to compute it, right? So it's kind of replace infinitesimal by finite differences and stuff like that, right? So it's all kind of numerical methods how we solve, say, Navier-Stokes equation with computer. And no,
Professor Rodin.
Yeah. Yes?
I had a question about this triangle.
Yeah.
Previous one. Did he ever say anything about where he sees statistics? Because if you're talking about modeling, I think
that's interesting. By the way, that's interesting because in his Unachieved project, he actually does a lot exactly for probability and statistics. No, I would say it's on this level of modeling. It's so certainly not
inside MM.
Hmm?
So statistics is happening inside MM.
I think so. So. Yeah. So it's probability theory would live here in pure math, right? Here statistics, and here some computational model based on statistics or something like that. I think so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but his idea is to make this shortcut from computer to set theory. So he doesn't want this analytic part. He says it's kind of useless. So he wants to use this, say, set theoretic structures like modern or synthetic mathematics, kind of modern abstract mathematics here. And he wants to have a shortcut from these things to computer models. You see? So after all, we would get that. So this is shortcut from computer model to set theoretic model. And this analytic model may in certain cases be formed or not formed. It's actually dispensable here. That's his proposal. Okay. And then he makes also the next step interesting. So he says, in order to implement this new scheme, we need in particular to reformulate fundamental and applied scientific theories in the language of today's abstract mathematics. So to replace this old style analytic language by synthetic, namely the set theoretic language. And for this end, we need to specify for each theory a notion of basic unit. And now, in next slide, I explain what is, and consider sets of such units. So what he understands by units is very straightforward and kind of naive. So he says, let's think about population biology and demography. And that's, after all, what he's chosen for his applied project. So we would have individuals, say, humans, individual organisms, and sets of individuals. Financial mathematics, say, companies, waters, in physics, particles, in genetics, genes, in some future theoretical chemistry, as he says, molecules. And then we would consider sets of such things and use set theory and all this set-based modern mathematics. And so we don't need anything like differential equations. Yeah, and that sounds, yeah, and he says the most important task is to produce examples. And so he invests his time and effort late in such examples. Okay, now it's the end of Vladimir's talks and only my comments after. Okay, so few comments about the set theory as a mathematical foundation for science. No, first of all, it's of course it's now rather looks like historical curiosity, but Georg Cantor had such ideas, and actually he wanted to apply set theory in biology. That was one of his motivations for set theory. So he's there is a nice paper by Jose Ferreiros, I think an excellent Spanish historian of this period. And this is a letter to Mitag Lefler, I misspelled double F, who was an editor of Acta Mathematica and personal friend of Georg Cantor. And so it's all in spirit of some natural philosophy. So he says that organic life is cannot be grasped by mechanical, say, models, and so his set theory would work better. And actually, if you consider that he was very much motivated by Riemann, and actually he borrowed from Riemann his first term for set, Mannigfaltigkeit, then it's not so unusual, right? Because Riemann, of course, was very much motivated by physical applications of his theory. And the difference is, of course, that Riemann's, how to say, motivations and ideas later realized with Einstein, general relativity, and with Georg Cantor, it didn't happen at all, right? It just set theory went in very different direction. Yeah, but it's just a historical remark. No, basically, I would say general remark that approach that Vladimir tries, it never worked. I don't know examples where it really worked in science. So what we may, how to say, quote is, for example, so-called semantic view of theories. Semantic view of theories, it's a label invented by Patrick Suppes back in 1953 with the co-authors, and it was supposed to replace so-called syntactic view of theories. Even semantic was a self-description, and syntactic never was self-description. And by syntactic, he meant people like Ernst Nagel, for example, who just tried to use axiomatic method in science more straightforwardly, right? And the idea was, why semantic? Basically, these people used, first of all, Tarski work about the same time, right? On model theory, on formal semantics, and they use Bourbaki style approach, and even this Bourbaki syntax of signatures. They just try to use it in science, and that produced the whole industry. It's actually still continues. In Germany, for example, was called structuralism in very specific sense, which was not like French structuralism, but the idea was just use the same method in science. So we have, say, signature, where we have, say, set of particle, set of real numbers, and we have something else, and we do physics out of that, right? We look what kind of structures. But remark is that, of course, scientists were not interested, right? So all this industry, it may be of value, say, in philosophy of science and kind of logically oriented philosophy of science, because you may say by representing scientific theory in that way, you better understand its logical architecture, and particularly how one theory relates to another theory. But of course, it's not the way physicists would work, right? Or mathematical physicists. So in that sense, it's a quite external tool, external representational tool, which so far did not work in mainstream science. And frankly, I don't believe it can work there. And another, say, influence where something like that approach worked is formal ontologies, right? It's something that first appeared in philosophy, in analytic metaphysics, and migrated to computer science. So it became very, how to say, practical. So basically it all comes back to, say, Tarski semantics, right? But as far as science is concerned, I think that's a kind of approach that we can just, to do some theoretical, say, deep looking to sets of people into mathematical sense of set, it simply doesn't work. But actually in his project in this population dynamics, he used exactly that approach, Vladimir. So his most extensive paper, 94 pages, it's called Singletons. And by singletons, he means basically individuals. No, then, of course, he tries to develop many things. A lot of pages are spent for developing kind of modern version of statistics, exactly, if you like, kind of categorical probability theory and statistics. But actually, my guess is, again, that the reason he actually abandoned was that he somehow didn't believe any longer in set theoretic foundations. And you see, it coincides in time. So his first paper, it was called Homotopy Lambda Calculus, appeared in 2006. So that's actually was high time for this, for crystallizing of those ideas which became Univalent Foundation. And this simultaneously, it was the time of most intense work on this biological project. And of course, they just didn't go together because that was basically in foundations was set theoretic. And I think that was the reason that he abandoned that. Yeah. I also want to quote here Vladimir, because that's the fact that set theory in the standard sense is hardly appropriate for science. Actually was mentioned by Vladimir. He said that true set theory, good set theory, should apply not only to abstract sets divorced from time, space, ring of definition, etc., but also to more general sets which do in fact develop along such parameters. And he means here topos theory, that his paper where he first introduced axioms for elementary topos. Right. And now another remark that there is, of course, a large body of works of people who try to apply category theory in physics somehow, theoretically. Vladimir himself, he also has this paper called Topos of Motion, and other people like John Baez, Urs Schreiber, and actually many others try to do that more systematically. But interesting is that Vladimir actually did not go at all into that way, because I think he really looked for a different kind of science. So those things are, it's kind of mathematical physics, right? So it's very theoretical. And Vladimir, you see, with his computer layer, computer model, so he had in mind something more oriented to empirical science, right? Or probably we may say data-driven science, and not theoretical physics, not quantum field theory and stuff like this. Right, that's, I already told that. My guess is that he's oh, I misspelled here. That really he was motivated by Univalent Foundations. And now let me, just will be concluding part of my talk, I'll try to evaluate Univalent Foundation, whether they can probably solve this other purpose. So remember, again, Vladimir had two big projects, right? One project, it made proof computer checkable, and that came to Univalent Foundation, and that's in applied mathematics. So let's just conceive of possibilities whether probably Univalent Foundation may also serve for, say, for theoretical biology on similar purposes. So one first remark that actually Univalent Foundation provide for this shortcut for solution what Voevodsky called double translation problem, right? So if we replace here set theoretic model by Univalent Foundation model, that's really, we have the shortcut from computer to Univalent Foundation, no, in the sense that Univalent Foundation are implementable in computer. That was one of its key features. All right. No, second point is very speculative, I admit. So Univalent Foundation is intuitive, right? So it exploits this spatial intuition. By the way, it also goes along what Vladimir said, right? That it's kind of, it's not like sets out of space and time. Here there is something to do with space and time, at least in some intuitive sense. And I just want to, I like this quote from Ernst Cassirer from his paper of 1907. So he tries to give new life to Kantian principle according to which mathematical concepts should be sourced in intuition. But then he says, what does it really mean, sourced in intuition? And he says that it basically means that they should be sourced in mathematical physics and should be proved effective in this field. All right, so if we somehow show that Univalent Foundation, or maybe something akin, Univalent Foundation really is connected to empirical sciences, including physics, that would solve the problem. And here it's just very naive. It's about Frege example that morning star is identical to evening star in a non-trivial way. And indeed, the observable trajectory path from one to the other is an empirical proof of this identity, right? Which is in terms of actually Martin-Löf type theory, it's not judgmental identity, but propositional identity, kind of not trivial identity we should prove. And that's actually fits this formalism of both Martinov type theory and its homotopical interpretation, of course, no, on very simple and elementary level, so it's just a dummy example, nothing more, of course. Yeah, and that's a more, I think, serious point, but I think I don't really have time to develop, to elaborate, but I think it's very important that Univalent Foundations supports what I call extra propositional constructions. What I mean that, say, if we use UF and somehow upgrade it for theory, either by adding certain axioms or, say, new rules, so anyway, it wouldn't reduce the scientific theory to a set of true sentences. And that was, by the way, one of motivation of this semantic view people like Supes, saying that scientific theory is not a set of sentences, it's rather a class of models. And I would rather add it's also a theory should include methods, essentially, not just as a heuristic, I would say, context, not just methods of discovery, but methods of justification, say experimental and observation methods, which by which we actually can prove theoretical sentences. And in order to represent such methods, we need certain non-propositional constructions. And that's what we have in Univalent Foundation, thanks to this homotopical hierarchy. So we have this propositional level, but also all higher levels. Yes. No, and finally, if I ask whether there exists already something in line of these ideas, and I think the closest I can think of is topological data analysis. There was a talk some time ago at this seminar, and actually I came across, I'm not an expert at all, that some people apply it in brain research. So they have a huge amount of data, which is located, how to say, it's labeled by time and position somehow, right? Different position in brain, and they don't want, they don't know what to do with that, right? But actually, they analyze it by this method and then use algebraic topology rather extensively. I don't think they really achieved some fundamental theory in that way, but at least that's an example. Yes. No, and finally, I have this part that I explain. I just recently uploaded to Pittsburgh archive. It's actually my habilitation dissertation, and then it's partly repeats my book in first part, but I have more stuff there on Univalent Foundation, and so you can find it on the Pittsburgh archive. And that's it. Thank you very much. So I probably restart my video.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you.
No, we should thank the speaker. I'm sorry. Any questions? I have a quick question. In the beginning, you say that his idea of population dynamics didn't work because he felt it was all based on something. Why didn't it work?
No, look, I should confess, I didn't look really into it's rather messy, and that was Voevodsky's judgment, right? That was not my judgment.
Right. Right.
But that was his definite judgment that it was absolutely wrong path. And I try to explain that by simultaneous work on Univalent Foundation, because you see he really stick to set theoretic foundation in that project. and earlier, before he came to Univalent Foundation. Even he was motivated by Grothendieck and everything, but somehow that he was not like Lavire, you know, who tried to make new foundations with category theory, with topos theory. Apparently, he didn't follow that that path. So he somehow switched from kind of hardcore set theoretic foundation to univalent.
I can give a little context from what I recall and looking through his stuff and some of the biographical recollections given at the memorial meeting. It's not a philosophical reason. It's that at a certain point he did a lot of work and he realized that the work that he did was interesting, was not new, i.e. he didn't know the field well enough and he was rediscovering things that were already known. And the work that he did that was new wasn't going anywhere. So he switched away from it simply for that reason, biographically, as far as I know. He just wasn't making progress.
Yeah, thank you.
Was there somebody? Was there? Oh, oops.
Yeah, how is it?
1 second, you're muted.
How about now?
Yeah, you're good now.
Hi, good seeing you. I came a little bit late to the talk, so maybe you talked about that already, but can you remind me again that what you think his solution to Wigner's applicability problem is?
No, look, he was not a philosopher, of course, Vladimir, right? So I think, no, basically he has this kind of Aristotelian vision, I would say, which also is dialectical materialism. It fits in that case. I think they are hardly distinguishable, and that means that he says mathematics is an abstract form of problem solving, right? And problem solving is kind of a life condition or something like that, right? So even sciences, like natural sciences, is a special case of problem solving, but mathematics is just the most abstract way of problem solving. And at the same, so there is no Wigner problem. Actually, no, it's different discussion, but my take on Wigner problem is actually, I think it's kind of related to, I think it's interesting to understand Wigner in a context, you know, in a narrow context, not as a just question about mathematics in general, but about the fact that, say, current foundation, you see, it's 60s. He published in 1960 his paper. And then it was all time of Bourbaki, of Marshall Stone in United States, who would explain that mathematics has nothing to do with physics. And Marshall Stone made this actually statement. I didn't include this quote, that he says that was the biggest recent discovery in mathematics, that it has nothing to do with physics. Almost like that. Of course, some people like Richard Feynman, they oppose. So it's all in that context, that if you really believe it somehow independent thing, then how it works after all, right? And moreover, it works on all the mathematics, because even kind of mathematics that Wigner was practicing was a group theory. It was not mathematics made recently in 60s, right? That mathematics like at least 50 years old. Right. So for Vladimir or say Gelfand was the opposite problem. But why it doesn't work all the time? Why it does work in biology, for example? You know, so it's different. But of course, he didn't go into philosophical arguments. No.
Thank you for that.
Sergei, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I want just to share some impressions of my encounters with Voevodsky. Of course, he was a brilliant mind and such a great loss for math and for intellectual life in general. However, I also recall there's a rather well-known movie about Ramanujan, but not it's called The Man Who Knew Infinity of 2016 with Hardy. And there's a moment, you remember when Ramanujan showed up in Cambridge, he came with a lot of hypotheses and just formulas, and he resisted proving things. He said, I see, that's true. And it was very exciting, and people began discovering one by one that indeed, after some very elaborate proofs, they justified these formulas. But at a certain moment, Littlewood shows up to Hardy and throws his just manuscript saying, he's not a god. So there were some of his conjectures, and Ramanujan's conjecture was proved wrong, and it didn't work. And of course, a great man, a great person like Voevodsky also had some rather flawed ideas, and projects and logic and educational ideas are quite questionable. And also we discussed, since I'm in both math and computer science, we discussed the computer science ideas. I don't think they're going to fly to fly really just too far. And this one in particular, I understand the idea of having everything transformed into a checkable, all the papers to be written in the checkable language. I understand this trauma which Andrei revealed of his early paper, which took them 23 years to find an error, even though they knew that there was one. Also, another joke, the story, and there is the famous saying in computer science, in computer science circle, which says that there is no difference between theory and application. This is what theoreticians think. There's a huge gap, and it's very, very difficult. You have to be native in both, and it should be a very special gift of being able to really bridge the whole thing. And Voevodsky was a great man, rest in peace, but he was not a god. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I never believed he was a god, actually, but I just think that kind of his take, his approach is interesting. Maybe it should be abandoned. Maybe we should take a lesson that we shouldn't go that way, or maybe develop. But anyway,
very stimulating. I agree. Very stimulating. That's the main thing. And people turn to foundations again, even the mainstream mathematicians. This is his principal achievement from the foundational point of view. People became interested in the whole thing, and also the standard set theoretical people, they did not quite like this take, because they had ambition to substitute the whole foundations by set theoretical foundations. It's clearly doesn't work. And well, in the category theory, society doesn't even worth mentioning, of course, yes. But now with Voevodsky's effort, it's basically everybody's understanding, and that's a big thing. Conceptually, the big thing. Yes. Thank you, Andrei. And so I don't have authority to conclude, but it's just my personal thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other comments?
I had a
Luca. Okay, go on.
A quick question.
One second, Lukash. 1 second. Tushar Das is talking. 1 second. Go.
So, Professor Rodin, I'm not sure whether have you read any of the work of Misha Gromov? It seems to me, I have not looked at the Singleton's paper, but I did find it using the link that you provided in the abstract. It's in the IAS collection. But it seems to me that some of what Gromov is doing very recently, he published a book in Springer, and it's called Ergo Brain and Ergo Mathematics. Those are keywords in his project. It seems to me that he is going back to trying to use category theory and apply it to biology. That's his, and he is using category theory to understand Markov processes and probability. And he seems to be developing these ideas, and I found it very interesting. I wasn't aware of singletons, but I found it very interesting that you quoted Voevodsky saying that it's a complete failure. So I wanted to know whether you know about Gromov's approach about ergo brain and ergo mathematics.
Yeah, I read a little bit. Looked, I'm not an expert, but just one thing for maybe avoiding confusion. Of course, Vladimir does use a lot of category theory, kind of routinely, also in singleton paper. So, but he never tries to make a foundation out of it, right? He does try to make univalent foundation, but he doesn't follow this Lavier line, I would say, you see. But of course, he does use category theory.
Lukasz?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're very unclear, Lukasz.
Oh, fine. Thank you very much. Such comment.
Still unclear.
No.
Vladimir Voevodsky in 2010 delivered a talk entitled "What if current foundations of mathematics are inconsistent?" This talk was delivered 10 years ago in September 2000.
Lukasz, pull back. Don't speak so loud into the speaker.
I can't get anything.
There's something about the foundations talk.
I'd like to make only one comment.
Lukasz, I get it. Maybe type out the question because you're.
Pull back from the mic. Pull back from the mic. Pull back from the mic. This can help.
Can I share this screen?
No, you cannot hear it.
I can't hear you. Back up.
Okay, so I write and track my comment because I like to think about the paper, okay, connected to the foundations of mathematics.
Okay.
And thank you very much.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Anyways, so I think we should thank the speaker again.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you, Andrei. Next week at the same time, Larry Morse is speaking, and same time, same Wednesday, 7 o'clock. I hope to see you all there. Anyways, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Marta, it's good to see you. Take care.